Welcome to Intersections, where faith, ideas, and life meet. I'm Carla Gober.
And I'm Lee Aveling. And Carlo, I want to congratulate you. Just in the last couple of weeks, you received an award. What was it?
I did. I finished my PhD. I defended my dissertation.
My, that has been a journey, an epic journey.
Yes, epic is correct.
Congratulations. Some other program I'd like to talk about it because you have some interesting findings. But today we have Dr. Ron Graybill, who's Director of Community Outreach for Loma Linda University Medical Center and the Norton neighborhoods. Welcome, Ron.
Well, glad to be here. Glad to be here.
Now, Ron, whenever we talk, you have stories. What's been happening?
Well, it just interesting. You talk about intersections, you know, and we're trying so hard to teach students from the university and the School of Public Health to look on the neighborhood as a place with assets and abilities and promise and hope and so on. And I was somewhat disappointed and yet inspired to do a better job when this group described two of the streets in my neighborhood as places that you shouldn't walk. And I said, well, wait a minute. I have kids that live on those streets, and I've been walking on those streets for 5 years. So it's really difficult sometimes for people to get out of their heads the image of poor neighborhoods being places of great danger and places without really any redeeming characteristics.
Let's back up just a little to help our viewers know what we're talking about. So often we work close to neighborhoods, but we spend all of our time, like I know for myself, I spend all my time in my career going to and from work, and yet there's a city close by me that I hardly ever enter, which is interesting. It's a city I was born in. I was born in San Bernardino.
San Bernardino.
So I come through there all the time, and yet I don't have much impact on the city itself. So today we're talking about that, right? How to look at the cities that we're living around.
Yeah. And this you know, the city of San Bernardino, our hospital gets more patients from San Bernardino than any other city. The city of San Bernardino is just like, you know, our after-school site, our neighborhood where we're doing our most intensive intervention is only 2.5 miles from the campus. From the front yard of our place, we could see the towers of the medical center until they built some more warehouses in between.
Sure.
And what's the difference in that 2 miles?
Well,
2.5 miles.
You know, what I'm going to emphasize today is the assets of the neighborhood and the good things about the neighborhood, but it does have challenges. I mean, the per capita income on the hills of Loma Linda is $28,000 a year for every man, woman, and child. That's not spectacular. I mean, you know, I think many of our wealthier constituents have moved over to the hills above Redlands, you know. But anyway, if you move from the hills of Loma Linda across Barton Road and down to the floodplain by the Santa Mateo Creek, the per capita income is in half. It's only 14,000. Then you go across the freeway and into this southeastern part of San Bernardino, and in the neighborhood where I spend a lot of my time, the per capita income is only $5,000 a year.
Wow.
And we have families that are living on much less than that, much less than that. But it's because they have discovered how to use what assets they do have in terms of family and friends and resources that they do have. But the nice thing about this positive approach to any kind of change that you want to create in your own life or in the life of your church or in the life of your neighborhood, the nice thing about it is that it doesn't just apply to desperately poor situations.
Before we talk about how it applies, let's talk about what do you mean by positive approach?
Positive approach. Well, you know, I do have a few slides that sort of talk about how this positive approach is used in several different disciplines. Let's just look, for instance, at a few here. This first one is is called the Appreciative Inquiry Commons. You don't have to be able to read this. I just want to show you this appreciative inquiry is often used in corporate settings, and even roadway trucking uses this. And appreciative inquiry focuses on not the problems that your company is having or your church or your achievements, assets, unexplored potentials, innovations, strengths, elevated thoughts, opportunities, benchmarks, high point moments, lived values, traditions, strategic competencies, stories, expressions of wisdom and insight. So then we come to the hospital. We have something we call family-centered care, so that instead of looking at the patient's families as sort of, well, we'll have to let you in at visiting hours, but these people have gifts and talents and abilities, and they can help us. My wife is in the NICU, and she does the kangaroo care. And she's often the first person that takes a tiny, sick baby and places it on the mother's chest. And the mother suddenly can look up and see that monitor and see the baby's oxygen saturation rising. And suddenly, although she felt so powerless before because of all those tubes and wires, she's doing this for her baby. She's the only one that can. We even give the mothers little baby washcloths, and they're supposed to sleep with these at night against their skin, and then we take that washcloth and put it in the isolette with the baby because the baby knows the mother's smell. Everyone has assets. Everyone has abilities.
And what would the assets be there in that situation?
Well, first of all, it's just her love and and the fact that the baby already knows her smell, knows her voice, and the fact that, you know, the father can do the same thing, actually, just a skin-to-skin sort of care. But we also try to appreciate the family's culture, the family's religion, the family's beliefs, and what they know how to do, because the long-term health of that baby depends on them, not on us. We can save the baby's life, but you know, week after week from now on, we've got to empower them to take care of the baby. In adolescent development, we have the Search Institute. This is another slide, and they focus on developmental assets. We're not talking about at-risk youth anymore. We're talking about resiliency. Here's the resiliency in action. The things that help young people succeed in spite of difficult circumstances. In psychology, we have Dr. Seligman has this website called Authentic Happiness. And he's saying, you know, and I'm sure that, Lee, you're a counselor, you're a chaplain, and so on. And he's saying, you know, okay, some people are going to have psychotropic drugs, but for most of the walking wounded that come into our counseling setting, we'd be much better off to say, when were you last truly happy? What do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? See?
So you're empowering them.
You're empowering them on the basis of their interests.
So where they feel they have some power and they can relate to it and then get involved.
Or you may even take them away from the difficult circumstances that they're in right now to some high point in their life.
Right.
Do you ever find that people struggle to find their strengths?
Well, you know, we actually have a capacities inventory that lists all kinds of things. And if you just ask them, what are your strengths, they won't think of them. But there's such a long list that say, oh, yeah, I did that. You know, I know how to do that.
So it surprises them.
It surprises them. And it makes you feel so proud of them and them proud of themselves. And now I'm not the holy man. I'm not the well man. I'm not the smart man. We both enjoy, what do you know how to do that they would never guess? What have you ever done in your life that was a real exciting experience that nobody would ever guess that you did?
Well, I can tell you something I did. I'm not sure I would recommend it.
Yes, what would you do?
I bungee jumped once.
See, I mean, the kids would be thrilled to learn that. And suddenly you're not just this professor from the ivory tower. Good grief, this woman did bungee jumping?
You got any photos of that?
No, I don't want to remember it, actually.
And Lee, I sort of know the answer to this, but what is the highest point in your life? What is the highest you've ever been?
You know, Ron, several years ago I turned 30.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Be careful. But anyway, to overcome that obstacle, I saw an advertisement for trekking in the Himalayan mountains, and I actually made it to a 1,500-foot peak right at the Everest Base Camp.
Yes.
So I've been up to about 19,000 feet. That was a real highlight for me, seeing 5 of the 7 highest mountains in the world on a clear day.
Yeah.
Is that an asset?
Spectacular.
That's an asset. No, I mean, I just came back from a chaplain's conference, and one of the stories that was told about a chaplain whose talent, whose gift was imagination. And he came to a patient who was, you know, really struggling, and said, you know, if you could be anywhere you wanted to be right now, the place that would make you most comfortable and most happy, where would you like to be? The man was dying, actually, you know, and the man said, you know, I'd just love to be at the beach. So chaplain said, oh, okay, just let me go for a few minutes. I'll be back in a few minutes. So the chaplain came back in, and he started painting this word picture of being at the beach. And the man started chiming in, you know, and everything. So they kept doing this day after day.
Sure.
And the man was so inspired and elevated that the chaplain finally told one of his colleagues, this man just won't die. You know, he just won't die. It's just too much fun.
Sure.
See what I mean? So, I mean...
Gave him something to live for.
It gave him something to live for.
Right.
And, you know, we know how important hope is and how important these high points in our lives are. So helping people to remember and to imagine something better than they're in right now. So.
Now, you quickly moved over the idea of youth and resiliency.
Yeah.
What kind of things make youth resilient?
Well, you know, we have a family in the neighborhood. They live right across the street. Well, I shouldn't say right across the street. Right across from them is an empty lot, and right beyond that is the local drug dealer. Okay? And there are 3...
Which San Bernardino is
Yeah.
known, yeah.
But let me tell you, I just learned something very interesting about drug dealers. Because one of the things we've noticed in the neighborhood is that although we have a drug dealer and we know the drugs are being dealt in the neighborhood, the people in the neighborhood are not very concerned about crime. And there's not very much crime in that little neighborhood. So I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm visiting with my old friend Tom Dibdahl, who works in the public defender's office. He defends murderers and thieves and all kinds of people like this. And he said, Ron, he said, let me tell you why you don't have crime in the neighborhood. The drug dealer doesn't want the police down there all the time for this and that and the other. The drug dealer wants a quiet
So it's protective.
neighborhood. So, you know, there's a text in the Bible that says God will use even the wrath of man to praise him. So all of a sudden I said, you know, maybe in some circumstances, in some small way, even a drug dealer can be a neighborhood asset.
Oh, yes.
I wouldn't, you know, I'd rather have other kinds of assets, but we've got that. But anyway, this family lives right across the street.
In terms of crime, anyway.
Yeah, in terms of crime. So this family lives right across the street from that, but one of the girls in that family is now making all A's. And part of the reason is not just because of my program, but another program called Exceeding Expectations, where she got involved in running and doing triathlons. And this other very nourishing, nurturing woman who was in charge of that program would, you know, take her out. And Marlene, you know, she would come to me and say, we're going to be swimming down at the Drayson Center. How much will you give me per lap, you know? And so she would be raising
She's saying
money.
this to you?
Yeah, oh yeah. She comes to me whenever she's going to do a fundraiser.
Can we back up just a little?
Yeah.
Okay, so you go into this neighborhood.
Yeah.
How did you identify this little piece of this area to even work in?
Well, you know, all the hospitals in California are supposed to be doing community benefits. I mean, all the nonprofit hospitals. And so we're supposed to be out there doing what the community wants us to do to improve life, quality of life, and health, and so on and so forth. And I suddenly realized that, you know, we are out there, we're doing all kinds of things here, there, everywhere, no rhyme or reason, and we're not concentrating our efforts enough to have some kind of measurable impact.
Right.
So I said, well, where should we be doing this? My word, this neighborhood, this very challenged neighborhood is 2.5 miles from our campus. We don't need to go to Indio to find a neighborhood to serve. Plus we have our Sac Norton Clinic where, you know, people can get health care for very low cost or no cost. And so we ought to be strengthening that. We already have that kind of a presence. Let's go there.
You know, I remember the day that you took me in the car, and it seemed like we had hardly gotten off the campus before you said, this is the area, here we are.
Yeah.
And what was interesting to me about that is that I had never seen that area.
Yeah.
And it was it's right at our doorstep.
Yeah. Well, and you know, many Christians have what I call a foreign fascination too. And I know, and it is true, that people in other countries are much poorer and much more desperate circumstances than the people in San Bernardino. And I don't want people to neglect the needs and you know, of the AIDS orphans in Southern Africa, or of people struggling on $1 a day in Honduras. I don't want that, but you know, you're only going to get to Honduras once a year, and you're only going to be there for a week, and you're not going to have time to build the kind of redeeming and healing relationship that you can if you come over here for 15 minutes, or you know, drive over here for 15 minutes and spend 40 minutes.
Or drive to your local neighborhood.
To your local neighborhood.
So let's go back to, is it Marlene?
Marlene, yeah.
Okay, so you identify this neighborhood, and Marlene is in the neighborhood. How do you connect with her and find out her assets? How did that bridge get built?
See, part of the challenge would be people are going to be suspicious. Here you are, you're coming from outside. So how did you go beyond that, where they received you?
Yeah, you're just one more person selling something.
Yeah,
or could be.
Could be. And we first started, we first went there, actually, that particular neighborhood, because we saw an article in the newspaper that said that the county had gotten $1.5 million to extend the Santa Ana River Trail, which is a walking, hiking, biking trail from Waterman to Alabama. Well, this happened to be exactly the north-south boundaries of the Norton neighborhoods that we had sort of said, this is where we should be working. So I said, wow, that's a neighborhood asset. I need to go get acquainted with somebody. So I went to the president's meeting of all the neighborhood associations in San Bernardino, and I was talking about how we ought to get that neighborhood involved. And the guy came up to me and said, you know, I already walked the Santa Ana River Trail with my dog Rex. Why don't you come down and walk with me? So I go down there, and we're walking down the street, and I see this trash, and I see these abandoned houses, and we turn a corner, and all of a sudden we see a beautiful iris garden, a beautiful yard, a well-kept house. And I said, the guy's name was, I said, Rudy, who lives here? He said, I don't know his name, but he's a Native American. He gets $10,000 a month from the gambling casino. And I said, but Rudy, he stayed here. You know, most of the Native areas, they went up on the hills and they built a big mansion, you know. But Beanie Chacon and his wife Petra's lived in that house since she was 10 months old in 1945. And when they came, they worked hard all their life, came into this money, they fixed up what they had, but they stayed right there. And eventually we were able to lease the lot right next door to them, which at that time was covered with tumbleweeds. We got a little grant to teach children about gardening. We got up some flowers, we went around the neighborhood. The kids don't have anything to do after school anyway.
So they wanted to garden?
Yeah, well, they wanted to garden, and they wanted to get treats and see what all this was about. And, you know, we started out giving them M&Ms to motivate them, and then they said, well,
and then progressed to tomatoes?
Well, no, strawberries.
Oh, strawberries.
Yeah, strawberries are great. Dates will work.
So did you have them coming consistently
right from the beginning, because this was not like, oh, we're going to go over to this school and keep the kids after school. We're in the neighborhood where the people live.
But how did the parents trust you, or they even care?
Well, you know, I suppose there's some kids that came initially because their parents didn't care that much. But, you know, we talk to the parents and we show them, you know, what we do to keep their kids safe.
So you basically get the parents on side?
Oh, yeah.
Do you knock on their door? Or do you find out where the kids live and they take you to the parents? Or how does that work?
The kids are wandering around the neighborhood. The parents are out in the yard. You know, you talk to them and you say, hey, we're doing this down here. Well, come on down. And once it gets started then, Marlene tells Anna, who tells Brenda, who tells, you know, Mauricio, and friends bring friends. And, you know, it keeps going. And it's easy to do because you're there. You know, they don't have to go anywhere. They can walk to the place.
I'm thinking that you were trained in a certain realm. You could have done so many things. Why this?
You know, I was meeting with a bunch of my friends, or not a bunch, three of my friends here about a year ago. And we said, you know, wouldn't it be fun if we figured out how many jobs we've had since we first did a job for money when we were kids, you know, we were teenagers or whatever. So we started going around the table. Each person would write down what their next job was. It took us, you know, an hour and a half. By the time all three of us had like more than 20 different jobs that we had done. But in my life, there happened to be a kind of a, what the Danes, my wife is Danish, would call a red thread that sort of went through it. I didn't realize this until I started looking. But it all started when I was a student in high school, and I dated a girl who was part Mexican, part Apache Indian, and part French and part whatever else. I had an aunt who thought this was terrible, that I was dating a Mexican. And it just seemed so unfair and unjust and outrageous to me that she should be offended by my dating a Mexican, that I acquired this everlasting, you know, desire for racial justice. Now, as I've gotten older, I've learned that we're all racist, even me, and that we have to fight against. We always favor our own and what's familiar to us, you know. And there's always so easy to think that this other group has this weakness and that. But that started it, and then, of course, you know, as a kid, I was also spent time being poor, and so when you put racial justice together with an experience of poverty and wanting to address economic justice and racial justice, it was a natural for me. And you know, my PhD is in American history, but we studied family history, immigrant history, history of labor reform, social reform, and all that. So I'm really doing in the 20th century what I was studying about them doing in the 19th century.
That's what was so weird for me when I went around looking at that, because I lived in those areas as a child, and I thought there was a bus that came around once a week to pick us up to take us to church, and they would give candy on the bus. But that was at that time was my only contact with that sort of thing. And I often wondered, I would never be able to meet the bus driver, but meeting you kind of makes me feel like I'm meeting the bus driver, you know, because you're someone who reached out to the children in the community, like that bus driver, like that church reached out to me. And it really moved me, you know, as I saw that area.
Yeah, let me go. Let me look at another couple of slides. It's really, let's look at this next slide. There is an application of these principles called positive deviance.
That's a great term.
Well, I like that because people accuse me of painting outside the lines or coloring outside the lines and all that stuff. But what happened, and I'll read this quote in just a moment, but what happened was they were working in the Far East in an area where there was a lot of childhood malnutrition. And so they brought in food and experts to try and improve the nutrition of the children. It wasn't working. Then they finally dawned on them, you know, there's some children in this poor neighborhood who are not malnourished. Why? So they went and they talked to the mothers and found out how these mothers were different from the other mothers in the way they related to their children and the way they fed their children and the way they tapped into resources. These were the positive deviants. These mothers who were keeping their health children.
So deviated from the mainstream.
They deviated from what everybody else was doing. So then they said, okay, you are the people that are going to transform this neighborhood.
And they deviated in the sense that they were more
Well, I don't remember exactly all that they were doing, but they deviated in the sense that they were feeding the kids different things.
More
things
wholesome.
that were available, more wholesome things, more nourishing things, and they knew how to get hold of them, and some of the other. So it says positive deviance, if we can go back to the slides, the positive deviance approach thus differs from traditional needs-based and problem-solving approaches in that it does not focus primarily on the identification of needs and external inputs, that's you and me, necessary to meet those needs or solve problems. Instead, it seeks to identify and optimize existing resources and solutions within the community to solve community problems.
I see. So that's the difference. It's not you going in, it's you helping them change.
Going in, helping them find and optimize their talents and abilities.
So in a way, this is empowering them, just encouraging them. Go for it. Yeah.
You know, there's a Bible text that captures this. You don't have to read a lot of sociology. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Right. So go into the neighborhood and look for people who do have a lawn and some flowers.
And help them. You know, we're almost out of time. I know you have a little story before we wrap up.
Well, I'm going to get back to the chaplain. The chaplain's thing.
40 seconds.
40 seconds. A chaplain was having a hard time connecting to a patient who was kind of discouraged and suffering, you know, and didn't really take much to the idea of a holy man coming into his room. And then the chaplain noticed a picture of this man with a trout. He was, that he had fished for, and the chaplain said to him, "You know, I've done some fishing, but I never did trout fishing. Tell me about trout fishing."
Yeah, almost out of time, Ron.
Once they were both fishermen, then the rest of it followed.
That makes sense. So they connected, and we are out of time. You've been watching Intersections. I'm Lee Aveling, and with me is Carla Gerber. Thank you for letting us into your homes.